What's up guys, it's Justin here, and today I'm very excited to bring you a full comparison between the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus and the Apple iPhone 7 Plus. So in the smartphone world, Samsung is always being compared to Apple. That being said, they're very different devices, and I'm sure a lot of people out there are trying to decide between the two flagship smartphones because they're both great phones, but it's just a matter of what is right for you. So in this video, I'm going to not only cover the specs and how they stack up on paper, but also my input on each category for each phone, and also leaving some room for you guys to decide for yourselves which one you think is better for you. There are obviously certain features that are more important to others, and the experience that is offered from Apple and Samsung curates to a different type of customer, so I want this to be as unbiased as possible. I'm going to try my best to keep it that way. Obviously, the iPhone is significantly older than the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus coming last year and is Apple's 2016 flagship, but when the 2017 flagship next generation iPhone comes out later this year, I'll be doing this comparison once again with Samsung's current flagship. I would also really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video if you're excited for other Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus and tech videos coming up in the summer, and also drop a comment down below after watching this video as to which phone you prefer and also give a reason why. But we have a ton of stuff to cover here, so let's get started with the hardware. So the US model of the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus has the latest Snapdragon 835 processor, which is an octa-core construction that comes equipped with an Adreno 540 GPU with 4 gigs of RAM and 64 gigabytes of storage that is expandable and Bluetooth 5.0. The iPhone, on the other hand, has an Apple A10 Fusion chip that is clocked in at 2.34 GHz and is quad-core, paired with 3 gigs of RAM, and is available in 32, 128, and 256 GB storage options. When it comes to design though, there are some prominent differences here. Starting out with the S8 Plus, you have a glass front and back coated in Gorilla Glass 5, aluminum borders, and is only offered in a curved edge option, contrary to what they used to do where they offered a flat and a curved model for your preference. The S8 Plus feels really good in the hand to hold, but I do find the phone to just feel very delicate in general despite being extremely beautiful. Just after a few days of use though, I noticed some micro scratches on the front of my Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus despite being relatively careful with it, so that's just something to know, and you should also get a debrand skin like I've done here to protect the back of the phone, and I'll leave a link to that in the description section below. The iPhone, on the other hand, has a very similar design scheme to what we found on the 6S and the 6 with an ion strengthened glass front and aluminum back, but the design's much more muted and unexciting when compared to the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus. It will be very interesting to see how Apple redesigns this phone in fall of this year. Samsung's design is much more futuristic in its beauty, but at the same time, you're going to have to take care of the phone, and some people might not like that because it just feels like a work of art as opposed to a normal phone you're supposed to use every day. But with that being said, it's without a doubt that Samsung takes the design category. It's also great to see that both phones are IP rated, with the iPhone 7 being IP67, which is 1 meter at 30 minutes, while the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus can stand 1.5 meters at up to 30 minutes due to its IP68 rating. And in terms of ports, you're going to find a USB-C and a headphone jack on the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus, and just a lightning port on the Apple iPhone 7 Plus. As you probably know by now, there is no headphone jack, but it does include an adapter to use your headphones if you need to. As for the buttons, the iPhone 7 Plus has a 3D touch home button that is not physical but instead taptic, while Samsung has also ditched the home button on the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus with a taptic on-screen home button. Both phones also have great fingerprint sensors, with the one on the iPhone built into the home button, while the one on the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus is located next to the camera, which is very inconvenient and in general makes it easy to smudge while being hard to reach as well. With that being said, both are fast and responsive, but one additional feature you have on the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus is the iris scanner for unlocking your phone if that's something that you want to use. So when comparing the form factor of these two phones, it's actually relatively close, but the screen size is drastically different. So it comes in at 6.2 inches with an 84% screen to body ratio at a 2960 by 1440 529 ppi resolution, and an insanely bright 1020 nits, to the point where there's even a warning to tell you before you go to the maximum brightness setting. It is of course a Super AMOLED display with 16 million colors, which is super vibrant and saturated, and has an 18:9 aspect ratio, as we also saw on the LG G6. The iPhone, on the other hand, has an IPS 16 million color display that measures in at 5.5 inches at a 67.7% screen to body ratio, with a 1920 by 1080 resolution at 401 ppi and 705 nits. From playing the same video and photo on both of the screens, I can tell you that the iPhone has a warmer tone while the Samsung Galaxy definitely leans towards a cooler tone. With that being said, you will notice right away that the colors are more saturated on the Samsung Galaxy S8, and it is also a significantly sharper display, but the iPhone one isn't bad in any way. At 300 nits brighter, the Samsung's display will also make it easier to view outdoors in a bright sunny day. I really like the screen on the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus, and it just takes advantage of the entire form factor of the phone, whereas the iPhone has a huge top and bottom chin. The 18:9 aspect ratio just gives you so much more additional space if you're using apps that involve scrolling, and when it comes to multitasking, it works very nicely as well. Whereas the iPhone doesn't really have any multitasking feature. Software is probably the biggest instant deciding factor between these two phones. You're talking between Apple and Samsung, Android and iOS. The S8 Plus, of course, has the latest version of Android Nougat 7.0 with TouchWiz skin from Samsung over it. I've seen TouchWiz improve very much over the past few years since the Samsung Galaxy S4, which was the first Android phone I reviewed, but at the same time, it is still not for everyone. I personally find it very usable at this point, and I still can't prefer it over stock Android, but it's smooth, it's fast, but still has a lot of additional features and apps that are installed that you might not ever use. Obviously, Android comes with a much bigger level of customization compared to iOS. And with the S8 Plus, Samsung has also introduced its own version of virtual assistant, which is Bixby, which isn't 100% completed yet, but we have seen some early glimpses of it, which seem pretty cool, but at the same time, I think Google Assistant is just much more developed and will remain as a preference to most Android users. It's also kind of unfortunate that there's a dedicated button next to the volume rockers that is just for enabling Bixby, which at this point, out of the box, is not very easy to reconfigure. The iPhone, of course, has iOS 10. It's fast, responsive, reliable, and very simple. It's really a what you see is what you get. There isn't much customization whatsoever, which many people hate. And if you're really integrated in the Apple ecosystem and utilize iCloud, own several Macs or Apple tablets, then you're probably going to prefer iOS. Relatively speaking, I also find that apps are better optimized on iOS, as developers seem to shift more focus on that department as opposed to Android, which is pretty unfortunate to say the least. But both phones are flagships, of course, so you should expect maximum performance. They're very responsive and great to use, but it's going to come down to what experience works best for you. So in this case, you're going to have to try out each one and decide which to go with. Cameras, of course, are one of the most important features of a smartphone. A lot of people now use smartphones as their primary camera, and with good reason. The Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus has a 12 megapixel f1.7 aperture that has a 26mm field of view, an optical image stabilization. You have the ability to record 4K at 30 frames per second and 1080p at 60 frames per second, and the front camera is an 8 megapixel f1.7 aperture that can shoot 2K video at 30 frames per second. Despite Samsung phones being known to have some over-processing in their images, whether it's the sharpness, the contrast, and the saturation, the S7 and Note 7 were the top 3 as I would rank it in all smartphone cameras that I have tested, and I will tell you that from looking at the quality, it still remains one of the best. Apple, on the other hand, is known for its consistency in the camera and has a dual 12 megapixel camera at an f1.8 aperture that has a 28mm field of view on one, and the 2x camera being a 56mm field of view at f2.8, and you also have a great optical image stabilization as well, which from my testing was the best in video compared to any other smartphone I had tried. You can record 4K at 30 frames per second, 1080p at 120 frames per second, and the front-facing camera is 7 megapixels at f2.2 with a 32mm field of view and can shoot 1080p at 30 frames per second video. The 2x zoom on the iPhone camera is something that I use quite a bit, and I would like to see Samsung eventually step into a dual camera setup like many other manufacturers have, hopefully with the next generation of the Note phone at least, and leading up to the next Samsung flagship next year. I actually had a really good comparison lined up while I was in Vancouver and got some great photos that really tested the colors of these two phones, but when I switched the SIM card of my Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus, it wiped all of my photos, so I kind of have to just take all the photos again. But I'm just going to show you some photo samples, some low light samples, front-facing camera, and also video samples side by side, and let you decide for yourself which one is better in your opinion, as opposed to giving you my preference. So battery life is one of the most important things when it comes to these phones, and despite having a very similar form factor, the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus has a 3500 mAh battery, whereas the iPhone has a 2900 mAh battery. The Samsung uses USB-C and has quick charge 2.0 compatibility along with wireless charging, while the iPhone of course uses Apple's proprietary Lightning port and has no wireless charging. That is hopefully a feature we're going to see later this year, and it's also a big question as to whether or not Apple is going to move towards USB-C as well, possibly in its next generation. I'm someone who uses my phone quite a bit, and I was able to get through one full day on both phones, with the battery life being slightly better on the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus. On an average day, I would have to charge my iPhone at about 8 p.m, whereas I was able to get to about 11 p.m. on my Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus. And when it comes to power saving, you have 3 different options on the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus that also offer customization when it comes to optimizing the processor, the screen brightness, as there's quite a bit of pixels to power on the Samsung. The iPhone just has the one low power saving mode, which turns down the brightness and puts your phone to sleep as soon as possible while also blocking certain notifications. That way it doesn't drain the battery from trying to receive through cellular or Wi-Fi. I think battery life really comes down to software efficiency, and although the iPhone is about 600 mAh smaller than the one on the Samsung, you have to keep in mind that there are much less pixels to power on the iPhone as opposed to the Samsung with just a 1920 by 1080 display, and Apple also uses their own chip as opposed to Samsung using a Snapdragon 835, which is way more powerful than you really need to for everyday tasks. When it comes to the speakers and audio, this is something that Samsung has really not made any improvements to in the past few years. You have bottom-facing speakers that are relatively loud and not clear at all, but at the same time, Samsung has also kept the headphone jack and includes $100 AKG earbuds, along with Bluetooth 5.0 technology that lets you do things such as connect 2 Bluetooth devices at once. Apple has really stepped up its speaker game for the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus, with stereo speakers that are found on the front and side that have relatively decent clarity and provide a much better experience than on the Samsung in my opinion. This is going to be very enjoyable for every single time you forget to bring your dongle and are going to have to listen to your video or music just from the speakers. And here's just a quick sound test between the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus and the iPhone 7 Plus's built-in speakers recorded from the same spot. So the last category I want to include was the benchmarks, and benchmarks really don't matter whatsoever, but I know a few people out there still want to know. Keep in mind that for the most part, these numbers do not reflect real-world performances because on paper, the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus completely crushes the iPhone, but Apple has always been focused on efficiency as opposed to having the beefiest processor on the market. You also have to remember that we are comparing iOS versus Android, in which the apps are probably completely different in terms of the way that they're developed and optimized for the specific device and its hardware. The first test I did was Geekbench, where the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus scored 1851 in single core and 6298 for multi-core. Keep in mind this is an 8-core processor, so the power in the single core is distributed to 8 different cores when compared to much fewer cores on the iPhone. The iPhone got 3,533 for the single core and 5,956 for multi-core, which goes to show that the number of cores isn't as important as you think. Moving on to the Antutu benchmark, the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus scored almost 164,000, whereas the iPhone scored 173,000. And the third test I ran was 3D Mark, where the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus scored 3,407 and the iPhone got 1,864. When running speed tests from the same spot, one at a time on the same network for each phone, the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus got 176 megabits per second compared to 125 on the iPhone 7 Plus. The SunSpider browser benchmark, on the other hand, got 404 milliseconds on the Samsung Galaxy, while the iPhone got 195 on Safari. With that test, the lower score the better, but when I did a real-life side-by-side comparison with a series of web page and article opens, the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus was slightly faster each time. So this once again goes to show that the numbers it scores on the benchmarks doesn't exactly reflect better overall performance in real-life situations. So now it's time for my final verdict, where we kind of run through each category. So when it comes to design, I think Samsung definitely wins it here. You've got the headphone jack, you've got the latest ports, and aside from the annoying Bixby button and the terrible placement of the fingerprint sensor, the phone is absolutely stunning. It looks beautiful, and it just looks like something something out of the future. The iPhone has a much more muted look, and it just feels like an everyday phone that I don't have to take care of as much as if it was a work of art, so that might be an advantage to the iPhone's design. The display also goes to Samsung here. It's a much higher resolution screen and is Super AMOLED, so the colors are just so vibrant. It's also respectably brighter than the one on the iPhone, which is very useful if you're going to be using your phone outdoors and have trouble seeing the screen. And the 18:9 aspect ratio is useful when it comes to screen real estate and multitasking, and the fact that these two phones are very similar in form factor shows that the S8 just makes better use of its space. I have to mention though that the iPhone has a flat screen, and some people might not prefer the curved edges. I find it slightly harder to type at times, and it's also easier to accidentally press something when you have a curved screen. You're also missing a physical button as a result of the larger screen on the S8. Based on software experience, it's something that you really have to experience for yourself, and is probably the first deciding factor before even considering comparing these two phones. I use iOS and Android quite regularly, but I personally prefer iOS because the apps are just much more reliable in my opinion and from what I experience, and I don't exactly need the crazy customization that Android gives you, but I can totally understand why people enjoy Android. The camera on both phones is very solid, and I would give a slight edge to the Samsung Galaxy S8, but when it comes to video recording, I definitely prefer the iPhone due to its much better optical image stabilization. If you think that you're going to use the 2x zoom camera and find that very handy, you're also only going to find that on the iPhone. Battery life was relatively close, but the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus gives you the option for Quick Charge 2.0 and also wireless charging as opposed to the one charging method on the iPhone. When it comes to the speakers though, the iPhone without a doubt wins. There's really no question or comparison here. I think Samsung really has to step up the speaker game, as that's one of the few things that they still need to do, as their newest phones have become near perfect, but audio has just stayed where it was a few years ago. At the end of the day though, these are both flagship smartphones that come in at the highest possible flagship price point that you can get for any phone on the market. You should definitely expect a lot out of them, but they offer two different experiences, and personally I'm an iPhone user because that's what I've been used to, and it's based on my ecosystem, what I have around me. I use a Mac to edit my videos, I have multiple Macs that I use on the go, and I'm someone who's very embedded in the Apple ecosystem through iCloud and everything. But at the same time, you're paying a pretty high price considering the specs on paper, but as I mentioned multiple times, Apple focuses on efficiency. The Samsung on the other hand has the highest end of every spec category with 4 gigs of RAM, a Snapdragon 835 octa-core processor, you've got that beautiful WQHD display, it's also widescreen, got one of the best cameras on the market, has a pretty solid battery, and just has every feature that a phone in 2017 should have, and to say the least, it is near perfect. But otherwise, I hope I made the tough decision of deciding which phone to pick up just a little bit easier when it comes down to the specs and what you might need, which design you prefer, and also some real life tests that I've just left for you guys to decide which one is what you prefer based on your needs. But otherwise, drop a comment down below as to which one you prefer and why, and also let me know if you have any questions, as I have both phones in front of me and I can likely assist you further in deciding which phone to pick up. And also leave a like on this video because this took a ton of time. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. I tried to be as unbiased as possible, and look out for some more videos of the S8, and I'll see you all in the next video.